hopefully I'm going to be able to close out this book today. So much in these verses. I didn't have an opportunity to give these verses a title, but we're going to begin a series when we finish this book of 1 Peter. We finished it. It took us almost 4 months. But I'm going to begin a series on God's plan for your life. After we finish this series, an interesting series of sermons about how God works in the lives of people that he calls, people that he uses. And we live in a time where people want to know what is my purpose, what is God's plans for my life. And so I'm going to begin that series after we finish this series of sermons. But I want to look at 1 Peter chapter 5. You may be seated. Y'all are so good and so diligent at your posts. Thank you so much. But I want to look at these last verses in this particular chapter. These verses are Peter's final words and final encouragement. And if I were going to tag this text, I had trouble trying to give it a title. And finally, as I was walking in this morning, I came up with this title: Your Responsibility to Your Membership and Your Relationship. Your responsibility of your membership to the church is what Peter is talking about. And then Peter talks about your relationship with God is your responsibility. And what Peter is doing in these last verses, he is writing this particular text in the midst of suffering. 21 times you're going to see the word suffering in 1 Peter, because Peter is talking to people who are suffering, people who are struggling. And the theme of Peter in these last verses is this: he's going to talk about how to manage your life in the midst of struggle, in the midst of difficulties, and in the midst of hardships. He's going to talk about that there are some environmental stresses that cause your life to be in chaos that you don't cause, but that things cause, circumstances cause, and people cause. There are some troubles in your life that you have nothing to do with. They just happen to you because you're human and you live in this world. But there's some suffering that you experience. It is because you love Jesus Christ and you've chosen to serve him. You've chosen to commit your life to him. So there are some troubles that come with serving Jesus. But then there is some trouble in your life that don't nobody know you going through but you and God. There's some unspoken trouble, some unseen trouble, some secret trouble that is going on in your life. And if people only knew what you had to live in and go through Monday through Saturday, they would be amazed that you even survived until Sunday morning. And so Peter says in the midst of all of this, he's going to talk to us about how to manage our lives. How to manage our lives, even though he knows that there are many things going on in our lives, and many of the things that's going on in our lives are very unpleasant. They're very hard to live in. They're very hard to deal with. And so Peter is going to give us some advice. He's going to close this book. He's really going to give a doxology or a benediction, but he's going to talk about your responsibility to the church, but also your responsibility in your relationship with God. He's going to talk about how to have a good relationship with God, a fruitful relationship with God, a productive relationship with God. And he's going to lay out in very simple terms how to have a good relationship with God, a relationship so good that if you are faithful to God, if you carry out that relationship properly, God will exalt you in due time. But listen, you can't put yourself in opposition to God. You can put yourself on God's bad side. You can put yourself on God's blacklist if you don't have the right attitude, if you don't have the right kind of character, if you don't live the right kind of life. And he's going to talk about the one thing that gets God's attention, the one thing that can put you on God's bad side, the one thing that can cause God to blacklist you. And that is pride. How God feels about pride. He's going to really talk about that. So I want to look at this because he's going to talk about your responsibility to your church, what you need to be doing. And he's not going to really give a lot of advice about that. It's going to be simple. It's really about two things. And then he's going to talk about your responsibility to God, because he's going to talk about you can be faithful to God and be going through difficulties. You can be faithful to God even though you struggle. Your relationship with God can be very active, and you can be very proactive even though you're going through a whole lot of stuff all at the same time. And I'm talking to some people in here who's got a lot going on in your life. You got this, that, the other. You got a lot of moving parts in your life. It seems like once you get over one thing, you run into something else. Once you offload some stuff, you have to pick up some other stuff. And it just seems like you've had more than your share of trouble. So I want to look at this. And the key statement in this verse is the verse that I really want to read. It's just a simple verse. It's verse 6 of chapter 5 of 1 Peter. Because my brothers and sisters, if you don't get any other verse in these verses that I'm going to preach from today, get this one verse. In 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 6. Therefore, humble yourself under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you in due time, casting your cares upon him, for he cares for you. You may be seated. These are some instructions about responsibility of membership and a responsibility of a right and productive relationship with God. He's kind of closing it out. He's already dealt with the elders or the bishops or the preachers or pastors. He talked about how they had to have the right motivation if they're going to serve in the church. If they're going to be shepherd over God's people, he talks somewhat about that. And he really goes hard for those who are in the position that I'm in, standing in the place that I'm standing. He says that we have to be right. We have to be an example to the flock. And he talks about the responsibility we have over the flock, and that one day we're going to have to stand before God to give an account of our stewardship over God's people. And one of the things Peter wanted to really express and explain, that the sheep belong to God and not to us. We are under shepherds over the flock of God, and we don't ever need to take the position that the church belongs to us. Our name might be on the marquee, but the church belongs to Jesus Christ. Matthew chapter 16 says, for upon this rock I build my church. And Jesus was very, very simple when he said my church. He built this church. He purchased it with his own blood. This church belongs to Jesus Christ. I don't care if Pilgrim Grove's name is on the marquee, if my name is on the marquee. The ownership of this church, the ownership of these sheep is Jesus Christ. He bought this church with his own blood. He purchased it with his suffering on that cross. The church belongs to Jesus Christ. And he wanted the preacher to get that in his head, to get that understanding, because we can start thinking that it belongs to us because people love to give us praise and applause, and we can start feeling ourselves, and we think that this church belongs to us, but this is Jesus Christ's church. And so now he moves to the younger. He's going to say in verse number 5, likewise, young people, submit yourselves to the elders. Now, I really don't have time to explain because I want to get all of these verses. But he's going to say and use the word submit. And this is a hard word for us to do. And this Bible, in the Bible that you and I read, this word submit is in the Bible a lot. It talks about wives submitting to your husbands. But here he says the younger members submit to the elders. In other words, what he's really communicating to us is that you got to be under somebody when it comes to your church membership. The problem most of us have, we don't want to be under anybody. We want to be over everybody. Can't nobody tell us anything, and we don't want to submit to any spiritual authority. We don't want to submit to any civil authority. We don't want to submit to any political or governmental authority. But in the book of Peter, one of the things he's going to communicate is the importance of submission. And he does not talk about the importance of submission because he says that you are inferior to the person that you are submitting to, but he says that submission says that you love God, and if God puts you under authority, you submit to that authority willingly, because if you submit to that authority, you therefore submit to God. Because he's going to talk about that word submit again in the text. But let me tell you, you can never and will never submit to God if you will not submit to the authority God has put you under. If you are a rebellious person against authority, authority is what he said in the first verse of chapter 5. He says to the shepherd, feed the flock, take oversight of the flock. And so if you have a hard time submitting to the authority of the pastor, you will have a hard time submitting to God. And so he says, submit yourselves to your elders. And then he says, yes, all of you be submissive to one another. Now listen, that is 2 times that word submit and submissive has been put in this text. That's why it's important, because it's repetitions. 2 times, submit to the authority of the pastor, but also submit to one another. And let me give you this. You don't need to think that you are more important than anybody else in this church. I don't care where you work, how much money you make, what job you hold downtown. I don't care what your pedigree is, what your degree is, what people think about you. Nobody is more important than anybody. We are all to submit to one another, to be submissive. In other words, you got to be open to instructions. You got to let somebody tell you what to do and what not to do. And that is probably the problem you're having. Can't nobody tell you anything. You don't submit to anybody. And let me tell you, I don't care who you are, what you have. There's always somebody who knows something that you don't know. George Peterson says, one of the things that we have to realize, the thing that keeps us back, the thing that holds us down is what we don't know. And what we don't know is what keeps us from being successful. What we don't know is what holds us back. What we don't know is what keeps us from moving forward. And to be submissive to one another literally means there's somebody in this church, in this congregation, that can tell you something. I know they don't dress as fine as you dress, drive what you drive, live where you live, have the position outside the church that you have, but there's somebody in this church that knows something that you don't know, that you need to know, and you will never know it if you don't be submissive to one another. I never will forget Mr. Duncan at George's Restaurant on Highway 15 in New Albany. Came in with Mr. Denoti Martin, one of my mentors. And Mr. Martin is a very rich developer, has a whole lot of money. He built McCullough Boulevard from the hospital all the way to Gloucester Street. And is a millionaire. And I listened to everything he told me, but he brought Mr. Duncan in, chewing tobacco, glasses real thick, hair straggly, not that very clean. And he was sitting down and said, come over and eat with us. And Mr. Martin got to talking. And I listened to everything he said because of who he was, what he had, how he was dressed, what I knew about him. But Mr. Duncan started talking, and Mr. Duncan said something to me that was so profound but so insulting. I could have done 1 or 2 things to Mr. Duncan. I could have rose up and put my paws on him. Or I could have submitted myself to what he said. Because what he said I didn't know, but I did know.
but coming from him, I heard it. Because forget about submitting necessarily to him, but submitting to what he spoke in his mouth. Because it's what I needed to hear at that season in my life. Be submissive to one another. But then he says this, be clothed in humility. Now this is the problem most of us have. We think we're too good to do anything. So we probably don't do anything. But to be clothed in humility is a very unique term, and I don't want to spend a lot of time, but I want to explain to you simply. You'll get it when I say this. To be clothed in humility is to be like Jesus when he washed his disciples' feet. Because Jesus had to explain to them, I didn't come to be served, but I came to serve. And he set his disciples down, and he put on an apron, and he washed their feet. Be clothed with humility. Humility. And I don't really have time to explain that word humility. But if you got to say you humble, you probably ain't. You probably ain't. You probably have no humility if you have to say to people in the context of the conversation, I'm humble. You're probably not humble. Because humility is not something that you describe yourself as. Humility is something that other people describe you as. Because if you describe yourself as humble, then you're not humble, because humility is not seen by what you think of yourself, but humility is what other people see in you. You cannot describe yourself as a humble person. You have to be described. Jesus didn't describe himself as meek, mild, and humble. Other people did. You're not humble if you say to me, I'm humble. By what metrics? Humility is what is imposed upon you because people see you being humble. They see you being submissive. They see you serving others. They see you doing what nobody else will do. And then let me give you this, because I'm almost finished. He says, God resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble. I've got to explain this to you because he uses the word submissive. He uses the word to be humble or humility. Now he says God resists the proud. Now see, this is the problem. This is where you have a problem, not with the church, not with the pastor, but with God. It doesn't say that the church resisted the proud. It doesn't say the pastor resisted the proud, but he says God. If you are a proud person, you and God got a problem. God will not respond to you. God will not bless you. God will not use you. God will not prosper you. God will not promote you if you got 1 ounce of pride in your heart. I want to give you 2 classic illustrations, and I'm almost finished. But I want to explain to you in very simple terms. Why did the devil get put out of heaven? He didn't get put out because of any sexual sin. He did not get put out of heaven because he was a gambler. He didn't get put out of heaven because he was a thief. He didn't get put out of heaven because he was a drunkard or a drug user or a drug dealer. He got put out of heaven because of his pride. Pride says, I'm number one. Pride says, I don't need anybody. Pride says, I'm better than. The one thing that got Satan put out of heaven was pride. But let me tell you, David didn't have no pride. He was a man after God's own heart. And it looked like if you and I were God, David would have got put out and killed. Because he slept with another man's wife, got her pregnant, got him killed, married her. And that man is still described as a man after God's own heart. Now, it looked like it should have been reversed. It should have been looked like that God should have dealt with David harsher than he dealt with the devil. But the thing God cannot deal with is pride. He flat out rejects if you think you are all of that. You think you're greater than God. You think you can be God. I mean, I can bring that home to you if you want me to. And see, the problem that you have, the reason why we know you got pride, because you think you can do anybody's job, you can do everything. You can even do what you ain't qualified to do, and you can do what you ain't authorized to do because you who you are. Because you think that much of yourself. You are so self-absorbed. You don't think that this show can... I know Steve don't like this song. If you got to go ahead and walk out the door. But one thing you better remember, one monkey don't stop. You know what this song is. One monkey don't stop the show. But you have a sense of pride if you think one monkey leaves, see if these doors close. Stop giving and see if these lights get turned off. If you got that much pride to believe that one monkey gonna stop the show, go ahead and walk out the door. But one thing you better remember, one monkey ain't stopping. I don't care who you is, how important you think you are. And we've had people to come in this church, come and go, stay for a while, leave, and the doors are still open, the bills are still being paid, and God is changing the lives of people every day. I'm not so important that if I leave, these church doors going to be shut. I'm not so important that if I leave, the bills ain't going to get paid. I'm not so important that if I leave, this church is not going to prosper. I ain't got that much pride. You're probably going to do better when I leave. And I ain't going to be mad about it. God resists the pride, but gives grace. And don't you need some grace? Man, this album got happy right there. Because see, he resists the proud, but he gives. I got to explain this to you, then because I might not get it further. But let me explain it to you. He gives grace to the humble. When he gives grace to the humble, it means the humble can stay in a difficult situation with difficult people, with difficult circumstances, and they still prosper. They can grow when it don't rain. They can grow in a drought when he gives grace. And grace is about an attitude of dependence, an attitude to look to God. He gives grace. I'm going to give this one illustration. I really don't want to give it because I might start shouting. Elijah is a demonstration of him giving grace to the humble. To give grace to the humble means go down to a brook and get provided water. To get grace means to go down to a brook where there ain't no grocery store. Ain't no butcher's market. And really ain't no animals coming to drink. But God sends a rain, which is breakfast every morning. And then when the brook dries up, he gives grace to the humble. God said, pack your bags. I got another place of grace for you. You go to a widow's house, and when you get there, she picking up sticks. And she tell you, I ain't got nothing But what I do have, I'm finna cook it, and me and my son finna die. When he gives grace to the humble, he'll speak to you to tell folk. And therefore, humble yourself under the mighty hand. I studied that term because it's an Old Testament term and it's an Old Testament phrase. Humble yourself under the mighty hand. And the word under is really not a good term. It really means to humble yourself in the mighty hand of God. And one commentator says you don't understand what it means to be in the hands of the mighty God till you go to the Old Testament and you see Noah in the ark. That's in the mighty hand. When everybody else is rained out and when everybody else is drowned out, you're safe because you're in the mighty hands of God. And listen, to humble yourself under the mighty hands of God, it literally means that even though you're running in the opposite direction God told you to run, even though you're in a storm, you're not destroyed. And when he tells you to be thrown overboard, he got a fish to catch you in his mighty. Man, humble yourself therefore under the mighty hand of God. And listen, this one phrase, that he may exalt. And see, this is what will irritate people about you. Because they don't understand how you keep getting exalted when they're doing everything they can to tear you and to mess you up. This principle kicks in because you're humble. Well, I'm about to get happy. Well, they can't figure it out. They don't know what the secret sauce is. They don't understand how you keep getting exalted when they keep trying to tag you down, trip you up, mess you up, and you still being exalted. I tell you, I'm about to get happy. And some of y'all, I can see you've been being exalted. Not only did the devil thought he had you, Negroes thought they had you. Your enemies, your exes, your family, your friends, your folks, everybody thought that it was over for you. But God was. Then he says, cast all your cares on him. And I really need to say this before I go. If you're going to carry your cares, don't cast them. That's right now. That's right. See, some things you got to cast. And I love the illustration. I ain't going to throw no Bible, but I'll throw a hymn book. Because one illustrator in the commentary says to cast your cares on him, it literally means you be trying to carry them, but you can't, and they get too heavy for you, and then you just and keep on walking. But now if you're gonna keep carrying them, don't cast them. And he did say all. And that's inclusive. All. And one commentator says, is it anything too small to cast on him? See, we only cast the big stuff on him. When we get sick and broke. You can cast some small stuff. Stuff that you think don't really matter to God. It really matters to God. And see, I be casting all. Big stuff and little stuff. Major stuff and minor stuff. Man. But he cares for you. And see, I know that for sure. If you're going to have a good relationship with God, you got to settle the fact, Butch, that God cares for you. And see, I know that for a fact. That's settled law in my heart. That God cares. Listen, he cares. I know he cares. He demonstrates his care. Don't nobody else love me, God. I know he loved me so much, Chucky, I'll go back to elementary school. I'll go back to Sunday school and sing that song. Yeah! Jesus loves me. Yes, Jesus loves me. This I know because the power. I don't have to sing no new contemporary. I'm going back to yes. Jesus loves me. This I. He cares for me. He rocks me in the cradle of his love. Rains down his blessing and power. But that's what keeps me going sometimes. Because I know he loves me. And really, what makes verse 8 easy to deal with is verse 7. Because you got an adversary out to get you. See, verse 8 would be scary if it wasn't verse 7 in front of it. Because before he tells you the threat, he gives you the assurance. Before he tells you about the enemy, he tells you. He tell you, I got your back. Right? Sober. Yes, sir. Is vigilant because the adversary, the devil, is walking about like a roaring lion. Some of y'all ran in that roaring lion this morning. Last night, last week, this morning. But cast. Cares upon me. I got to close. I got to close with verse 10, but I'm telling you, verse 8 is scary to me sometimes. Because he out like a roaring lion, roaming about. I mean, ain't a day I can wake up that he ain't out roaming around. See, I'm not surprised when I run into the devil. Because I'm sober and vigilant. Matter of fact, I expect him to be up, standing by my bedside every morning, waiting on me. And this verse says he stalked you all day. He'll go with you everywhere. He just wait for a chance to pound on you. Won't he? He'll sure do it. But look at what verse 7 said, cast. He cares upon it. Verse 10 says, but may the grace of God, all grace, has called us to him, eternal glory by Jesus Christ. Now listen, I got to close with this because, you know, I got to see some of you need an explanation for your suffering. Because you need to know why you've been going through what you've been. I got to calm myself. I'm glad Peter did this because he's been talking about suffering for 5 chapters. But now he's going to tell us why.
And the benefit. I started taking some new medicines, and the doctor explained to me that I was sick and I needed the medicine. And then he started talking about the benefits of how it would make me feel, how it would cure and handle my ailment, and how I'd be able to have more energy than I had, and how it'll make me stronger. And the goal of it is to eliminate the disease that's in me, but also give me an immune system that when the disease try to come back, the medicine he give me is going to keep it from coming back, because it's going to build up my immune system. Peter said all that in the text. Because he says, after you will have suffered a while. Now see, if I just had time to stop right there parenthetically and tell you, I don't know how long your while is. Your while might be 2 hours, 2 days, 2 months, 2 years. After you will have suffered. So he tell you it's going to be a while. That suffering gonna make you perfect. The word perfect doesn't mean sinless, but it means mature. And really the word is interesting, because what it does, it talks about that it's going to make you perfect. It's going to make you equipped to handle and absorb whatever it is you go through. And because you've already been through some stuff, so most stuff that you're about to go through, you're going to be able to absorb it, and you're not going to react the same way. You're going to act different. You cried the first time, but you're going to hallelujah this time. Because you understand that trouble don't last always. That God is going to rescue you. He's going to get you out of some stuff. But sometimes when he perfects you, he's going to get some stuff out of you. Because he is perfecting. See, some of us know about that. Sometimes when he perfected us, he got us out of some stuff. And then other time when he was perfecting us through suffering, he was getting some stuff out of us. Because he was doing that to give us something we could appreciate. And so you had to suffer a while. But after you have been equipped to handle the suffering, God needs you to keep what you used to walk away from. Because after he gets you equipped, he wants you to stay where you are. And understand that whatever you go through where you are, because of where you've been, you are established. You're in it for the long haul. Because you've already been through enough stuff. And if that stuff didn't crack you, that stuff didn't break you, and you survived, you got some staying power now. Old folk that said God puts you some roots down. And you'll be like that tree planted by the rivers of water. Even though the wind blows, the leaves might fall off, but the tree still. Then he talks about strength. After you've been established and equipped, perfected, now you need some strength. Not strength to fight, but strength to survive. Because it doesn't mean things are going to be perfect. It doesn't mean that things are not going to be without controversy, conflict, and problem, but you need some strength. See, that's what I be praying for. I need some strength, man. I know he's perfected, equipped me. I know he has established me. And I've been suffering for a while. I need some strength. Let me tell you what strength is, and I've got to close. The strength is this. Strength is what you don't know you got until you need it.
Oh, now you done been through some hell, and you didn't know you could survive the hell. And you didn't know you had strength to make it through the hell. But when you got into hell, strength that you didn't know you had showed up to get you through what you was going through. Because you said, Lord, I can't take nothing else. Because something else happened. I wish this was original to me, but Dr. Christopher Davis of Memphis said this. He was driving in his car and he passed 2 or 3 gas stations, went on a long trip, and eventually the empty gas tank light came on. And he was a long way, about 50-some miles to the closest gas tank. And he was nervous, so he didn't know what to do, whether to pull over and call somebody to bring him some gas. But then he decided to pull out the manual in the glove box. When he pulled out the manual in the glove box, he got to read it. And what the manual said, even though it's on empty, it's still 50 miles left in the tank. Even though you're on empty, you still got some miles to go. I know it looks like you ain't got no more strength. And you can't go no more further. You running on empty, but keep on, because he put more in you than what the dash looks like. And then he says not only to strengthen, but to settle you. If I had some time, I deal with this now. See, that's the problem. See, the problem is you ain't settled. You're too mobile. You pop in, you pop out. You're in today, you're out tomorrow. But suffering is to get you settled, to stay in one place, because if you keep transplanting the same plant over and over again, eventually it might look good on the top, but you damage the root system, because the plant has to get acclimated to soil, and if you keep putting it in different soil, you weaken the nutrients that it needs to grow. It might look good on the top, but in the bottom, you can't keep changing. Listen, I know horticulture, and Patrick Crawford know horticulture. You can't keep changing. The alkaline of the soil is what makes the plant settle. I can really give it to you like this, Pastor. Pastor, you can help me if I don't explain it right. See, because the longer a plant stays in the soil that it's used to, and the longer it stays in that soil, the roots get acclimated to the soil, and the soil provides nutrition, and it gets used to growing. And listen, it'll produce enough to grow if it can just get settled in one spot. But if you move it every year, every month, and sometimes you don't have to. There's a such thing as annuals and perennials, and one is annuals. You have to replant them every year. But it's some stuff, if you just leave it in the same place, it'll keep growing. And then he that last verse that I'm closing this whole book out, he started talking about praise, dominion, and glory. You want a good relationship with God, know when to shout. And when you go through suffering, shout. Give him a little bit of glory. Then God greets some people, Sylvanus and Mark in that text. And he really says to them, he closes this book out by saying, listen, we know what you're going through. He used that word Babylon. He talks about either Jerusalem or Rome, wherever he was, it was a hard and difficult time. But he says, it ain't going to overtake me. It ain't going to overwhelm me. Because I'm trusting in the Lord, every head bowed. I sure feel like preaching. Because I'm telling you, God has been good to me. Been so good to me. Sister Coburn, my favorite new term. How you doing? Better than I deserve. I'm telling you, God will exalt you in due time if you humble yourself. And people will wonder why you still standing, how you still standing. All the hell they raised, all the low down, dirty things they did, how they tried to manipulate, destroy, tear you down, and they see you being prospering. I tell people the best revenge is success. Just keep living it, and God will promote you in due time. He'll give you more than what they tried to take. He'll give you more than they made you lose. He will promote you and exalt you, and he will let you be blessed, and he will prepare a table in the presence of your enemies. Hold on and hold out, every head bowed and every eye closed. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for your blessings. Thank you so much for your presence. Thank you for all you do, all you have done.